Welcome to Celtic State of Mind. I'm John Dykes, and for today's Axon Bulletin, I'm delighted to be joined by Connolly and Natasha Meikle. Once again, it must be Tuesday. I've not been on the Bulletin since last Wednesday, so it's a welcome back to me as well. I thought that it would be good to mix it up a wee bit. So on a Monday, you're going to be faced with Russell and Kevin. On a Wednesday, it will be Colin and Amy. And on a Friday, Anthony, Laura and Jim. But on a Tuesday and Thursday, I will join the rest of the team. So welcome back to the show, guys. How you been?
Good, thank you. Apart from, Sunday night aside. Otherwise,
it seems
okay.
All season, how you been? Everything's fine except the football. That's what we've been getting. Now, yep. We are going out live on Twitter, Facebook and on YouTube. We do monitor the comments. Please keep them coming in. Your comments are key to making this interactive. It's all about opinions. So if you disagree, get involved. We're going to be talking about what has actually happened since Sunday, because every time there's a bad result like that, there's a fallout. And I was talking last night and someone asked me about, how's the podcast going? And I've got to be honest. See, when we get beat, it goes absolutely mental. I mean, the amount of people that tune in. And I think that's because people want to vent their anger, their frustration, make their points. But I take no pleasure from that. I've got to be honest with you, because, if we weren't getting that amount of people tuning in, that would probably mean that Celtic were doing better. So I would much prefer the latter, Natasha, trust me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, it's one thing that you guys were perhaps accused of after the game on Sunday, who were on, that they were, smiling or being jovial or trying to see the positives. Like, at the end of the day, you've got to, we all accept and we all appreciate how terrible this season has been. But if we were told down tools and not bother talking about it and only be miserable, then the podcast wouldn't exist. So it's up to us and it's up to the guys who came on after Sunday to come on, do the show, make the best of what they can, and try and inject a little bit of life back into the support. And people need that. People appreciate that when you're, feeling unhappy at the way things are going, when it's all pretty miserable. It's sometimes a great outlet to, come on, listen to this podcast and listen to other people feeling the same as you are. It's a great outlet for that.
It is. The other thing that I enjoyed last week, taking a couple of days away from actually being involved directly with the broadcast, is I enjoyed just sitting watching it, because it's difficult sometimes to know how it appears to the audience. So it was good getting some feedback in and around things like adverts. So when you're watching live, you don't get any adverts popping up. But once the live broadcast is finished and it sits on all the platforms, then there's a default setting. And what happened was, it was basically bombarding the bulletins with adverts. So I'm going to apologise. That wasn't me trying to make a quick buck. It defaulted when you switch the ad settings on. It defaults to this every 5 seconds job. So that's sorted, and apologies for anybody, because I was watching it and it was frustrating me. So I felt your pain. Lawrence, going into this season, we decided, because of the season that it promised to be, but also because of the lockdown and everything that was happening, and the fact that it does fill a void for a lot of people, we decided to go live every single day on a Celtic State of Mind. Now, I'm going to be totally honest with you. I thought it was going to be a completely different conversation that we were going to have every day, and particularly after match days. But it has turned in, I guess, to us looking at every single nuance of Celtic. What's gone wrong? And sometimes people would accuse you of being negative, but it is difficult when you're trying to strip back all the layers at Celtic Park. It is sometimes difficult to find a positive. And I'm going to bring up Lawrence, the first point coming in from AJSC Technology Videos. Welcome to the show. You're commenting on YouTube. Aye, Lenny rebuilding his own demolition. OK, right you are. That is the biggest thing for me. I watched with interest. He gave a few post-match interviews, Lawrence, and when he was talking about, first of all, he was asked about a rebuild. Is it a big rebuild? And he admitted, yes, it is. I think we all know the size, the magnitude of the rebuild. And he said, I've done it before. So obviously that was something you and I have had a wee WhatsApp conversation about. Do you think he has done it before?
The 14 players one close season, McGeady and 13 others out the door. So I don't know, is 14 players a big rebuild? Perhaps, but it was a long time ago. Long time ago now. I would say 14 players is probably a bit of a rebuild on it. We're bringing in Hooper, etc. at that time, and Yama. But is he going to get the chance to do it again? Lenny seems to think he is. I'm not too sure. It's hard to get kind of any communication from the club. Is it exactly what the plan is? It's just, every time we keep coming back to, look, just tell us what you're planning. You don't need to go into the details. Just say, listen, is the review ongoing? Is it not ongoing? Have you decided that Neil's staying? Have you exactly what's the plan for the future? If it's the new CEO, we want him to come in and have a look at things over the summer, and he'll make a decision once he's in the door. Just tell us that. It can't be that hard to tell us.
You and I have locked horns throughout the season, Lawrence, but obviously that's fine because we can get away with that because we've known each other for many, many years and it's good to debate and disagree. But you eventually came round to the thinking that there was change required at Celtic Park. When you hear Neil Lennon saying, I'm here for the rebuild, I've done it before, I think I deserve a chance. Do you think he deserves a chance? I mean, the reason I'm asking that is that was a long time ago, and I think this is a bigger rebuild. Yes, the club did need someone to galvanise it when he came in first time round after the Tony Mowbray disaster. I've got to call it that because it was really poor during the Tony Mowbray era. And he did have to rebuild the side, he did. But this is a bigger rebuild for me, Lawrence, and the actual depth that we have fallen to now, I feel, is even worse than what we were seeing back then. I mean, Gordon Strachan's last season was poor by his own standards. He's admitted that after winning the league for Tommy, winning 3 in a row, with hindsight, which is, we know is great looking back, he should have walked, but he didn't. He gave it another season. And it was a poor season for Celtic. I think it was one of the ones that you really regret because you've seen points of that season where we could have done things better, particularly in the transfer market in the January. You remember the Stephen Fletcher fiasco where we could have signed him and we didn't, and we've been there since in similar situations. And then Mowbray comes in, very expensive acquisition, bringing Mowbray and his backroom team in, and yeah, it was poor, but I don't think this job could be compared to the job that Neil Lennon had first time round. And by the way, yes, he brought success to the club, but not immediate success, Lawrence. I mean, that first season we didn't win the league.
No, we didn't. I think you're right. I think it's a bigger rebuild. If you look, we need a new keeper. Out of defence, who's stage, you'd like to think we could keep Chris Hire. Well, who else in defence is going to be is Welsh going to be good enough to be a first team starter? Is he going to be backup? He's definitely going to be first team squad. I think Taylor's a first team squad player. You go to midfield, we're probably central midfield are probably okay. Defensive midfield might be okay. James Forrest comes back wide. You need another winger. And up front, if Edward goes, you're left with a Yeti and Klamala because goodness knows what Griff's going to be there. So just about every area of the park is kind of deficient, isn't it? So it's going to be a huge rebuild.
You brought up a few points there, which I'll throw over to yourself, Natasha. First of all, the rebuild. What was your thoughts on Neil Lennon's comments in relation to I've done it before? Do you think he has tackled a job of this magnitude before?
I don't know if anyone has at Celtic, to be honest. It's not just about rebuilding the team that are on the pitch. It's about, a rebuild in terms of the whole structure, perhaps. It's about rebuilding the relationship with the fans, and that's key. And Lennon's certainly not the man to do that. It's too far gone for him to do that. no matter what he does now, between now and the end of the season, his relationship with the fans is sadly over, and the fans do not want to see him there next season. So regardless of whether or not he's the man to bring in the players on the pitch, it doesn't matter, because he's not the man to rebuild the relationship with the fans. And that's the big issue. So in terms of the rebuild, yes, we need one. No, he's not the man to do it. And I get what Lawrence is saying, that every area of the pitch needs looked at. But on the other hand, there is the core of a good squad there of players that I think we can and we will keep. You even look at your core midfield. If we've got McGregor, we've got Sorrell, we've got Turnbull, that's a good centre of the squad there. Welsh looks like he could come into a game. Can we keep Ayer? Probably not. Maybe Julian in 9 months' time. Greg Taylor's sort of settling into that left-back slot. Whether he's the level that we want is another question. Forrest coming back in as a good winger. Can Mikey Johnston perhaps fill a slot? Can we keep El Yunusi for $5 million? There's good players there in the good core of a team. So I think there will be a lot of coming and going, but it's not as massive as it's perhaps getting made out to be in terms of personnel. The biggest thing we need to do, of course, is replace the management team, and everything flows from that. That's got to be the first step, and it's got to be in the board's minds now.
I've been, obviously like everybody else, really picking the bones of this and thinking there must be a reason why no decision's been made. I mean, you look at the people who make the decisions at Celtic. In business and life, they are paid to make these big decisions. They can see what we have been witnessing. But then certain comments are made by Neil Lennon, who obviously is delivering the message far more regularly than anyone else from Celtic, and he comes out and says it's not been the unmitigated disaster that some people are making out. Now surely that isn't the feeling at the club.
If this isn't an unmitigated disaster, then I would absolutely hate to see what an unmitigated disaster of a season was, because, I don't think it can possibly get worse than this. In full context, we've had bad seasons before, we've had bad runs, we've had bad decades, but in context, this season is an unmitigated disaster. This is our big season. This is our record-breaking 10-in-a-row season that we've been leading up to for 9 years. And, it's not even as if we've come close and fallen at the final hurdle. It's not as if we've really competed and been blown away by a great Rangers team. We never really got started. It went wrong from the get-go, and it's every decision made since has been the wrong one. So it's not like we came close and we tried and we hold our hands up. It's been a disaster, and his failure to recognise that either is trying to save himself and save his job, or it's completely detached from the reality of what's going on here for the fans.
Now, Lawrence, we've spoken about Neil Lennon first time round and a rebuilding job that he had on his hands. I'll probably be jumping back to a similar scenario where, let's go back to the last time anybody in Scotland was trying to win 10 in a row. Now, Celtic obviously stopped that, and many Celtic fans prefer to call it 1 in a row because, we're talking about our achievements rather than somebody else's failure, if you call it 1 in a row. So absolutely. Now, after that season, obviously the manager left, and thereafter there was a period whereby that pendulum swung back in the direction of Ibrox. So after Wim Jansen, you had Joseph Venglos. And then after Joseph Venglos, you had John Barnes and Kenny Dalglish, the dream team, as it was called. Now, that was 2 seasons of abject failure, domestically and in Europe. Yes, I know we won a cup under Kenny Dalglish, but, it was a forgettable period for Celtic. Now, after that season, when Barnes left after the Inverness Cali game, and then Barnes took interim control of the team, we were in a situation then, and I'm going back to what Natasha was saying, where there was actually the nucleus of a very good side. But it was completely fractured in the fact that, there had been 4 managers in 3 seasons at the helm, and many of the players had to adapt from Wim Jansen to Venglos to Barnes to Dalglish. That was difficult. We had brought players in who, had good pedigree. Guys like Stan Petrov, if you think back to trying to get his permit, and having to get testimonials from Hristo Stoichkov, and then when you seen him playing, you thought, what's all the carry on about this guy? He's absolutely murder. He looked terrible. He was getting played at fullback. He was overweight. He couldn't speak the language. He was being written off at that time. So sometimes people revise history because Petrov went on to become a fantastic player for Celtic. And, you know, he's one of these guys in the modern age that you ask anybody about and they talk about him in glowing terms. But back then, that's not the Stan Petrov we were talking about. So, you know, I'm looking at this squad at the moment and I see it more as that kind of rebuild, you know, the post-Dalglish and Barnes rebuild, Lawrence, whereby, you know, Martin O'Neill comes in, he inherits the squad that we're talking about. He's looking at that squad thinking, well, I've got a Champions League winner in the midfield in Paul Lambert. I've got Moravcik, who's just a wizard. At that time, obviously, Larsson, and don't forget, Larsson had only come back for one game at that stage. That was the last game of the previous season against Dundee United, where he came on as a sub, sporting a ridiculous moustache. Watch the footage, he definitely had a moustache. And Martin O'Neill inherited this squad that had loads of promise, but also had big name signings like Petrov, who came in for a lot of money, like Berkovic at that time, and obviously the Brazilian Rafael, and we know what happened with him. But I think it's similar now. Whoever comes in is inheriting a very good squad, albeit a fractured squad, but with some signings that are in place who haven't really influenced Celtic's season, but they might. So when you're looking at that, Lawrence, we've brought in 7 players this season. You know, it's not as though we sat and rested on our laurels and thought we've got a good enough squad. We brought in 7 players, 7 first-team players. You know, some people might say, well, David Turnbull was a project and we got lucky because when he came in he played so well. I'm not so sure he was a project. I think he was always part of that first team squad. Now, many of them, 4 of them in actual fact, will be going back to their parent clubs. Do you think we can resurrect careers such as Albion Ayeti and Barkas? Because Barkas was in the news this morning. I was reading that perhaps he's going back to Greece. Do you think we'll cut our losses? I mean, anybody coming in, I agree with Natasha, we've got a squad there that if we get the right management team in, yeah, there's a rebuild. Yes, there's going to be a very difficult and busy transfer window ahead. But it's not a case of tearing it all up and starting again.
You touched on, can he resurrect careers? If the new manager can't resurrect careers, he's probably the wrong guy for Celtic. I mean, look at Bobby Petter, look at Chris Sutton when he signed there, and he'll arguably careers resurrected. The market we shop in, we seem to take players that, you know, aren't doing so well, and we're looking for the manager to bring something out of them that they've not shown for a while, whether it's Elanusi or Ajeti just now. But certainly that's the type of manager we're looking for, isn't it? Someone that can get players' careers back on track. I mean, there's players there, but how many will be staying and going? Out of the loan signings, who's worth keeping?
Well, I'll ask you the question. Who would you keep out of the 4, Lawrence? Who would you keep?
For me, no one out of 4. I don't think they've done
Not
it.
Even Moy? Not even Elyounoussi?
He's hot and cold. He's scored a fair amount of goals. But, you know, it's down to the new manager. If he thinks he can get more out of him and playing better. But so far, he seems to go missing in a lot of games. But maybe that's the formation we're playing and the tactics we've got on the park that doesn't suit him. It's really, you know, would I kept Bobby Petter when O'Neill came in? Probably not. But he went on to be an outstanding player under O'Neill, didn't he, Petter? So
I remember 2 games in particular, Lawrence. In the game against Ajax, which was a big game for Petter going back to the Netherlands to show what he can do. He was very close at that stage to getting a call-up for the Netherlands, in actual fact. And then the 6-2 game against Rangers, which we'll all remember, and he was outstanding that day. Bobby Petter, interestingly enough, I know I kind of digress from time to time, but when I interviewed John Barnes last year it was, Barnes made a few comments in relation to Bobby Petter, which I felt were unfair because he had never spoken about them himself. So I spoke to Bobby because Bobby, as you know, Lawrence, plays for the Celtic Greats, who are sponsored by a Celtic State of Mind. And I spoke to him, and he was okay with that, but he would have preferred if he had told the story rather than John Barnes. And this was a story about Barnes inviting Bobby Petter into his office, and Petter having such a hard time of it at that time that he broke down in tears. This was all revealed by John Barnes when I was speaking to him, and Bobby had never spoken about it. But what he did say, talking about the turnaround, and this is relevant to the here and now, is I just took it for granted, Lawrence, that Martin O'Neill came in with his magic wand and he resurrected the career of Bobby Petter and Chris Sutton, obviously, who had been a £10 million signing for Chelsea and scored 1 goal. But he resurrected his career. He breathed new life into Henrik Larsson, who, as I said before, he'd only had 1 game post-leg break before Martin O'Neill came back in. But he said, no, you know what, it wasn't actually Martin O'Neill, it was Tommy Burns. It was Tommy Burns who worked behind the scenes with Bobby to build him up, not just in terms of his technique, because Bobby Petr had technique. It was all about his confidence, rebuilding the man after what had happened under John Barnes. So I think that shows you just how important the management team is, not just the figurehead. You know, you've got to have these guys in the background, Natasha, who are able to step in and assist the manager. And I seen a thing, and it's been picked up on by some of the media sources on Sunday night when Griffiths is getting ready to come on. And I don't know if he's putting tape on his socks or if he's tying his laces or if he's just pretending to do any of the above. But he wasn't listening to Strachan.
No.
And, you know, Lenny is taking the brunt of this. That's what happens when you're a football manager, and I totally get that. But we can't give the full responsibility to Neil Lennon. The full team, the full coaching side have to take the responsibility here.
Yeah, absolutely. If we're pinning the blame on Lennon for various elements, then that can equally, the same finger can be pointed at Kennedy and Strachan. You've got Lennon coming out essentially after the game saying that he doesn't know what to do to make us defend set pieces any better, that he's tried and it's just not fixable. And it's a stat that was put up during the game. 43% of our goals we've lost this season have come from set pieces. And, Lennon's pointing the finger at the defenders, strangely saying that perhaps they don't want to head the ball, which is bizarre. But, there's got to be a stage, and it's actually a point that Anthony Joseph made on Twitter the other day, which is quite well put, is that, you're saying that the players aren't learning, but you're the one that is teaching them. Mm-hmm. So, and if you've got a class of pupils and one of them fails an exam, then, you quite rightly blame the pupil. If you've got a class of pupils and all of them fail the exam, then you've got to look at the teacher and the teaching methods, which clearly aren't working. And right now, if we're looking at Celtic as a classroom, all of those players are failing the exam. So you've got to turn to the teacher. And in this case, that's not just Lennon. That's Kennedy and Strachan as well. They're the ones who are out on the training pitch all day, every day, and they're not able to teach them how to defend a set piece. That fault lies at them, not just the players. And there's been absolutely no recognition of that by Lennon or any of them. Lennon points to a million elements, all these mitigating circumstances, the players, the pitches, the weather. Never once, does he ever look at himself or his coaches.
No, I absolutely agree with that. Now, the good thing actually one of the good things for the audience that I won't be on the Bulletin 5 days a week now is that I don't talk about some elements more than once to different pundits. I only speak about them once. And I haven't spoken about these mitigating circumstances, Natasha, in relation to Neil Lennon's comments. Now, yesterday I was talking about this and I said that, it's almost as if he's speaking in riddles. So on the one hand, as Lauren says, we're hearing nothing from the club. But when I look at that, I think, well, we're not. We're not getting statements from the club. We're not getting statements from the hierarchy of the club. But we hear from Neil Lennon a couple of times every week. Not directly, but, on the press conference duties is Neil Lennon. But, there's one thing communicating, but there's another thing just talking in riddles. And Neil Lennon coming out and saying, by the way, there are mitigating circumstances here, but I'm not going to reveal what they are. It doesn't help, does it?
No, I mean, exactly. The one constant criticism the fans have levied at the club all season is the lack of communication, the disengagement, the lack of open honesty, and Lennon coming out and saying, yeah, there is something going on, but I can't tell you about it. That only makes it worse. That only sort of amplifies the feelings of the fans of being totally detached from the club. And we can all appreciate that there are things that go on at a club behind the scenes that are best not to be made public for whatever reason. Fine, but by saying this, you're bringing it into a public forum. You're telling us it exists, but then that you can't tell us about it. All that's going to achieve is make the fans feel even more detached. So what did he actually try and achieve by saying that? Other than, again, to get the finger pointing away from him, to point at some other unknown element that he can't tell us about.
I know. And then what happens is we discuss it. because we are looking at what angle could he have been taking that from. So, Lawrence, when we're looking at that particular comment, the mitigating circumstances, I do tend to agree that it's a case of let's share this responsibility out. It's not all my fault. But when we're discussing it, what happens is we theorise. And one of the theories that I've read about is that he's talking about the players that wanted away, the ones that obviously he commented on after the Ferencváros game in August. They wanted away and he was willing to let them go, but they were kept without, his kind of agreement. Now, if that's the case, and as I say, that's not been confirmed, if that's the case though, let's go back to the teacher argument that was being made before. If that is your biggest complaint, that all your best players are there and available to be coached and improved and developed and motivated, then surely, again, that is your responsibility. And that can't be seen as a negative. If you've got 4 or 5, let's say Ncham and Frimpong were 2 of the players, because they have since left, all right? So I think that qualifies that they probably were, and there was rumours in and around it, that they, from sources, that they were 2 of the players. The other 3 could be Ajer, Christie and Edouard. Edouard's made his feelings known. Neil Lennon's spoken about that. There's been talk of Ryan Christie wanting to move down south, and there's been interest from AC Milan in Ajer. By the way, I don't think it's affected Ajer's performances this season. I thought, out of this season he's been one of the high points. So let's say there was 5, and there might have been more, because Julien's name's been mentioned. I mean, there's half a dozen players. There's the core of your team. That isn't a negative that you're allowed to keep them, surely.
Keeping people that don't want to be there, I don't know, if they're unhappy, as you said, Lennon's got that tune out of them, but I think it's been alluded to on Twitter by people connected with the club, rotten apples in the barrel. It's a hard ask of Lennon to get more than half the team that don't want to be there, allegedly, back on form and playing. I mean, people are saying Edward's back in form. Is it because he's playing for a move? Out of 5, I think you're right. Ajer's the only one that's turned up all season and put in performances all season. Mm-hmm. But then again, you're kind of going, well, why are you picking other ones when they don't want to be there and they're not putting in performances? Is an even bigger question. I mean, out of the other 4, probably Eddie's the only guy we didn't have a replacement for. You didn't need to play the other ones. Frimpong, you could argue what, because we've got a fairly sizable fee for him. But the position Christie plays, there's a number of players at the club can play that position. Position Cham plays, there's a number of players can play that position. So if you've got problems having them, you don't need to pick them. You can pick other players to play because we're covered.
It's a good point, Lawrence, and I think when I was becoming frustrated after the Ferencváros comments, I did say, well, we brought 6 in as it was at the time. There might be 6 unhappy players. Play the 6 new guys, because they're not unhappy, they've just joined, and that was my kind of take on it. But again, we don't know for sure that it's that 6 players. We're looking at the situation and it's an educated guess, or an uneducated guess, as it may be. But when you're looking at the performances of these players though, Lawrence, and you mentioned there about Ryan Christie, the first thing that came to my mind from Sunday night, Natasha, was a situation where John Joe Kenny's come up here and he must be looking about thinking, what on earth have I joined? He's taking a throw in, and right in front of him are 3 players: Tom Rogic, David Turnbull and Ryan Christie. Now they're basically standing almost in a line within a 10-yard kind of space, right? And it begs the question, do they even know where they're meant to be? Because obviously there has been this suggestion from a few ex-players who have played under Neil Lennon that he doesn't do tactics. You have to figure it out for yourself. So Marvin Bartley says from his time at Hibs, doesn't believe in tactics. Kelvin Wilson didn't do tactics. And Joe Ledley alluded to that as well when he was speaking to Cy Ferry on Open Goal. It's a big issue, because I'm sitting watching the game and I'm taking notes. You might think that's sad. It's just so that I do have something to discuss afterwards. And I'm taking notes and I'm trying to figure out where they're all playing. And you're thinking, well, there's 3 number 10s. And they're basically, they're all situated in the same area of the park, yet we have no width. For me, that comes down to the manager.
Well, that's exactly it. And that's one of the problems when you try and shoehorn 3 players that play in the same position into different positions and then don't get the best out of them. And it's one thing we've said all season, when you sit and look at Celtic, you think, what shape are they playing? What are we trying to achieve here? Where is the shape? Where's Rogic meant to be playing? Where's Christie meant to be playing? What are the tactics? And you think they're there, but, going by all evidence, maybe they're not. And the frustrating thing is, listening to John Hughes before the game, that was refreshing. He came out, he told us what his tactics were, he said how he was going to set up, he told us what the game plan was going to be, and then executed it perfectly. His team were going to sit in, they weren't going to make stupid mistakes, and they were going to wait on their chance from a set piece. Perfect. The 3 subs they brought on, again, perfect. They didn't drop off the levels, they didn't mess up the shape like ours do. You didn't question why they were being brought on, and it worked because, one of them, I think, eventually ended up winning the free kick that led to the goal. So there's a guy who's studied his opposition perfectly and matched them and got the result because of his tactics and because of the way he set his team out, and it all made sense. And it's frustrating to see another manager just be able to achieve that so well when ours, and it's something Kevin touched on yesterday actually, is that does he even actually look at the teams we're playing and decide how to set our team up best to match them, because there's no evidence of that. And you just have to look at the St Johnstone game beforehand. He pointed out Stevie May as their main threat for St Johnstone. Now at the time Stevie May had started 2 out of 10 games for St Johnstone and scored no goals. So that was wrong. So how much effort and preparation and tactics does he actually put in? Because it looks like none when we see it on the pitch, and all evidence points towards there being none.
No, you're right. And the point that Tony made last Friday, and I can draw on people's comments because obviously the contributors to AXOM, for me, are varied and they're insightful, knowledgeable, opinionated. And often what happens is, I'm not saying you steal their opinions, but their opinions embed themselves in your own kind of mindset, and then before you know it, you're thinking, I agree with that. And he did say, last week about Neil Lennon is an analogue manager living in a digital world. And I looked at that comment and I knew exactly what he meant, because obviously I was around in an analogue world myself. But I think about him turning up at Celtic Park and being in his office, and there's probably the to-do manual that Brendan Rodgers has left for him. You can just imagine it in a file, and it's all chronological and it's all neat and tidy. And by the time after Neil Lennon's first day in charge, that's probably been shredded. Because I don't think he's bought into that. The only thing for me, from speaking to people who've played under him, with him, talking to people within the media who might have got close to him, is that it's not about tactics, and that's worrying. And I think what's got Celtic through under Neil Lennon in the past is we've just had better players, a stronger squad, and an ability, when things aren't going so well, once or twice a season to go back into the transfer market and buy a ready-made replacement who's a better player. Has he got an eye for a player? I think he does. I mean, let's be fair, I think he definitely does have an eye for a player. Some of the guys mentioned earlier by Lawrence, I know for a fact Gary Hooper was identified by Neil Lennon via Jim Melrose, who was doing quite a bit of work down south at that time, and who was his agent at that time, Neil Lennon's agent, former Celtic player Jim Melrose. So he does identify a player, he does have an eye for a player. Is he a motivator? I think he was, but I don't think he's changed his style. Therefore, if you try and deal with Edouard the way that you dealt with Tony Stokes, you're going to get a different response. And I think that's the biggest issue here. Now, there's a good point coming through, and it's coming in from Shuggy25. You're commenting on YouTube with a beautiful avatar, Nakamura. Lennon thinks he still has a chance at the Celtic job next year. It worries me that someone higher up has told him this. Now, I'm going back to that time he said there had to be a change in culture. And I think I went on about it for probably 7 or 8 weeks afterwards. And Jim Orr got to the point where he told me to stop speaking about it. But I think that in order for the rebuild to be successful, it's not about identifying players, bring them into the club. Because let's be honest, we've brought in 7 players, most of whom are international players, who should be doing a good job for Celtic. It's not about identifying players. It's about what you do with them once they come to the club. It's about the culture of the club that they are stepping into. And, we look about, people said I gave Laxalt unfair criticism the other night. I think what I was saying is my overall kind of view on Laxalt is it's been dreadfully inconsistent. I think it's been disappointing, and I think he's regressed. And this is a word we've heard time and time again. So Neil Lennon could go out there in the summer and buy another half a dozen players who are capped for Greece or Norway or whoever it may be, Republic of Ireland. And there's no guarantee that he can mould them into a team. There's no guarantee that he can get a tune out of them. That's my biggest concern, because the cultural aspect of it has to change. And I think it had to change the first time round when he left and Ronnie Dyler came in, and it actually had to change when Ronnie Dyler left, because obviously the senior players had created a culture whereby they didn't buy into the gaffer. So Brendan Rodgers had to come in, and you needed a strong character to completely change the culture. I think we're at that stage, Lawrence. Would you agree with that, or do you think the culture aspect of it has been blown out of proportion?
No, it's definitely a huge part to play, isn't it? And any new manager is going to have his own culture or style that he's going to want to bring on board. I mean, what happened to Ronnie was ridiculous, the senior pros doing that. You know, there might be professional footballers, but, you know, there's only one of them survived at the club after it. You know, it was almost a complete clear out of players that had been causing trouble for the manager. Would we do the same again? I don't know. You know, the point that you put up, has Lenny been told by somebody higher? Maybe he has, because if you're right in what you're saying, that Lenny wanted the players going, the players wanted to go, and somebody higher started making decisions on the football side saying, well, no, keep the players, it'll be fine. There's also the Tommy Johnson argument that comes in, you know, Lenny wanted Johnson in his, oh no, you're Strachan as your coach. And you said Lenny doesn't do tactics. Who done tactics first time round? Was it Parker? Was it Mayarby? Was it Thompson? Whatever it is, that the management team just now definitely doesn't work. You know, there is no way it works. And we know they don't do tactics. Cal McGregor said it in 2 post-match interviews.
Yeah.
We don't know what we might be doing. More or less, that's kind of paraphrasing both interviews, was we don't know what we might be doing out there. You know, and 3 players within 10 yards of each other when we've got the ball, you know, nothing like making the part big, is there?
with three strikers on the bench. With 3 strikers on the bench. That game last night, for me, you know, and I'm not saying when a player's not playing, he becomes a better player, and I know that's a habit that football fans get into, you know, why you're not playing this one and that one. People were saying it for weeks about Sorrow. We put him in, lo and behold, he's a great player. So yeah, you know, it becomes frustrating for a fan watching this, where you're starting with one up front. So the first thing that I would say, one striker actually up front. First thing I would say is, I don't think that's the most effective position for Edouard to play, Natasha, because he doesn't seem to have that. He needs the out ball. He needs the out ball. The intricate play, close ball control's tremendous, but often what happens, I'm going to stand up for him a wee bit here. How many times this season have we seen him where there's been probably 4 defenders round about him, and he tries to meander his way through all 4 of them, and people say he's being greedy. Sometimes he gets through. He's got the ability to get through. Sometimes it's because he doesn't have the out ball. He doesn't have the striker, someone like Griffiths, who stretches the back line. Now, I've heard time and time again that Celtic last season, in the second half of last season, were excellent. You know, they were putting teams to the sword, and there was a turnaround, and people look back to this trip, the original trip, I'm going to call it the original, I know it wasn't the first trip to Dubai, not this season's trip to Dubai, and how that was a turning point in the season. They come back, they find their form. And we look at, well, what changed? In the second half of the season, one of the biggest changes was Edouard was dying on his feet, and we brought back Lee Griffiths, and we played 2 up front, and it worked. It absolutely did work. Now, a game like Sunday night, he's decided not to play Griffiths for whatever reason. Ayeti's come in for a few games and he's been disappointing, let's be honest. Klimala, I don't think, has ever really set the heather alight. There's been moments and you think, oh, he's maybe got something. I remember at McDermott Park, that goal he scored after getting chopped. You thought he's got the strength. He might be a player. But you're looking at that team, and you're even at half-time, if you've decided I'm going to go up one up front, at half-time our discussion was, this isn't working. It's not working. We're not stretching the back line. There's no width. Who's the one guy you go to? You go back to Lee Griffiths. You go to the situation that turned around our season last year. Because is Lee Griffiths a worse player? Well, he's got less games in his legs this season. He's not a worse player. His technique hasn't all of a sudden deserted him. And I just looked at that point where he was coming on, and I'll still have the notes in my book here, and I was looking at Strachan more than anything else, trying to get a message to Griff, and I'm thinking, what can he tell Lee Griffiths about goal scoring? What information could he impart? And this was in the 65th minute. So we were 20 minutes into the second half, by which time the kind of rot had set in, and lo and behold, 5 minutes later, Ross County score. And I just think, sometimes it's the real obvious things, like you play one up front in 3 number 10s, that ain't going to work. And sometimes I think to myself, well, John Kennedy's meant to be this highly rated coach. At what point do you go to that guy who's behind the scenes, who's part of your coaching staff? Like the Tommy Burns example I gave you, where someone is making a difference to the team. You look even back at the great Martin O'Neill sides, the great Brendan Rodgers side, the great Jock Stein sides. It wasn't just about the one man. I mean, they were obviously the pivot, but it was about the team. And I don't think Neil Lennon's got the strength in his coaching staff to trust that they're going to assist him along, to trust that, and it's not about going over the manager's head in doing so, but to make sure that Callum McGregor does know what the game plan is. Because when your vice-captain comes out twice in the so-called 10-in-a-row season and says we don't know what we're doing, that's a terrible indictment on the entire coaching staff. It's not because Neil Lennon's not told them, it's because none of them have told them. So I think it's time that Neil Lennon, right, is quite rightly being criticised, but it's also time to say, you know what, it's a joint responsibility here. How many times have we said, Natasha, Kennedy should be doing some of these post-matches? I mean, he's come out the other night there, Neil Lennon, and he's done 3 separate interviews. 3 separate interviews. He's getting asked the same questions. He looks absolutely struggling, bedraggled, shattered, to the point where he's now repeating himself. And then I think in the last interview he walks away before it's finished. He's done in with it. So we could say, that's arrogance, Neil Lennon. That's typical Neil Lennon. But let's look at the situation as balanced as possible and say, has he been hung out to dry here by the board? I mean, he's got this review hanging over him since December. We're now into February. We'll soon be into March. That's a huge amount of pressure to be carrying, isn't it?
It must be. It absolutely must be. And you can tell it's taking its toll. He's getting more frustrated. There's these outbursts in the interviews. And no wonder, he's a man under a serious amount of pressure. But pointing the finger at his management team isn't wrong. And I think what you'd find is if the board or the club had any confidence in Kennedy as a coach or a man manager, then he would have been intern by now. And the fact that he isn't probably speaks volumes in terms of what he's doing at the club as well. The 3 of them together are wholly uninspiring. I mean, you just have to look at the body language of all of them on the side of the pitch. Strachan with that iPad and Griffiths not speaking to him. Kennedy looks miserable every time the camera cuts to him. And then obviously you get the photos of Lennon sitting with his feet up. I mean, it doesn't matter if, we're 3-0 up. I don't want to see my manager sitting in the touchline with his feet up. I wasn't feeling that relaxed. I couldn't have sat in front of my TV with my feet up, watching the game. I was much more animated than that from my own home. And, the fact is, we weren't 3-0 up. At the time, we were 0-0 with the bottom side, or as they were at the time. That is not the attitude I want to see from my manager. And again, it cuts to John Hughes, who's on the touchline. He's animated, he's shouting instructions to his players. And all we ever hear is, Lennon's occasional, go on then, or more intensity, or he's sitting with his feet up. I mean, that's not what I want from the side of the pitch. That's not going to inspire me if I'm on it. No, absolutely not. Other managers that have completely outfoxed them, and you're right to praise John Hughes. Yogi obviously was on this podcast during the season, earlier part of the season, and he's a manager that, I've always had a great deal of affection for, Big Yogi, because he is an old-fashioned manager. So this proves that it's not about being an old-fashioned manager, is about being an old-fashioned manager who can adapt to the modern game. And I think you're seeing it in the likes of Yogi, who's able to get these results, and it's tactics-based. It's data-based. He's looking at that Celtic side and he knows where to hurt them. Whereas I think Kevin Graham's right, we're not looking at Ross County and saying, how do we hurt? We've just got better players than Ross County, which means we're going to get a result. And it's happened so often this season. Jimmy Goodwin has outfoxed Neil Lennon this season. David Martindale, 2 draws in a week, and you see it time and time again. Now, we've seen a lot of comments coming through all season in relation to the fact that the fans have protested. Various podcasts have been very vocal. You look at the season that we've had, and I was looking at this yesterday. Every single month, you could actually go through every single month and find a mini disaster
unravelling throughout the season. You go back to August, Bolingoli, Ferencvaros, the comments afterwards. September kick-started a 5-month period where we didn't beat a side in the top 6. October, we were defeated against Rangers without a shot at goal. Aberdeen 3, Celtic 3, where we were ahead and we couldn't maintain the lead to see the match out. November, 2 defeats against Sparta Prague, home and away, 4-1. At home, it was a second-string side, remember. They were ravaged by COVID. We move on to, he shouldn't have survived the second game against Sparta Prague, yet he does. We place Ross County at home in the Cup, this historical Cup run that we're on. He drops Callum McGregor and we get beat. There's protests after the game. December, moving into December, Celtic 1, St Johnstone 1 at home. A fluky equaliser that we score near the end of the game. But all we get told is, but we won the quadruple treble. We drew with a championship side 3-3. If you really want to get into the nitty gritty, yeah, we did win a quadruple treble, but we only contributed 2 games to that this season, Aberdeen and Hearts. Moving into January, Rangers beat us 1-0 at Ibrox, and a lot of Celtic fans think, well, that's it, because we played well for 60 minutes, that's the league gone. We jump on a plane to Dubai on the other side of the world during a pandemic, and we know what happened then. Now, in January, we dropped 12 points. 9 of those points were post-Dubai. And we move into February and even more. And at the end of January, I almost forgot, St Mirren beat us for the first time in 31 years at Celtic Park. So it's not as though this is a knee-jerk reaction. It's not as though we're entitled Celtic fans. We've been screaming from the rooftops for months. There's massive trouble in paradise. And I think the big question is, how do the fans have a collective voice, Natasha? And a couple of weeks ago, you got in touch to tell me that there were moves happening in the background. Tell us a wee bit more about that and what we can do on AXOM at some point this week to put that message across.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think some fans will have seen across the Twitter channels the announcement of Celtic Shared. And if you haven't, go and check out their Twitter page. They've got some great details on there about who they are, what they do. There's a question and answer, a video, so go and check that out. But what they're looking to achieve is, in the short term anyway, is greater representation of the fans at Celtic Park. It's one thing that we've all felt has really lacked this season, and the way to properly achieve this is if we start to bring groups together. So prominent fan groups, media groups, supporters buses, supporters clubs, if we can all come together and have one combined voice under one umbrella to try and push for change at Celtic Park, then this is going to be the best way to achieve it. The Celtic Trust are involved. They've already done great work in this area. So that's just getting started at the moment. There's going to be kick-off from that over the next few weeks. And one of the first steps to kicking off this new initiative is that we've got a couple of guys going to come on AXOM on Thursday to tell us a bit more about it, and they'll answer some questions as well. So 11 o'clock on Thursday morning, tune in, have a listen, let us know your thoughts, and beforehand, if you've had a chance to check out the Celtic Shared Twitter page, and if you've got any questions that you'd like us to put to the guys, then drop us a message and let us know, and we'll ask them on the show.
Absolutely brilliant. Really looking forward to that on Thursday. There's a few comments coming in welcoming me back to the hot seat. So just to explain exactly what's happening with that, I thought you might want a break from the norm, and variety is the spice of life, as they say. But at the same time, I've got a really strong group of contributors on AXOM, and I don't have to be here every day. So Kevin's going to run the show on Monday, Colin's going to run it on Wednesday, Laura's going to run it on Friday, and I'll come back in for Tuesday, Thursday. So really it's to mix it up. It's to make sure that people don't think we've got an agenda that's been driven by me and my thoughts and my beliefs and my opinions. And it's really just to get as many people involved as possible. But it really does showcase the wealthy talent that we've got on AXOM, and it will also allow me to go away and do other things AXOM related. So on Thursday, as Natasha says, we'll be speaking to some of the representatives from this group, Celtic Shared, which I think is a great initiative. And then on Thursday night, I'm going to do another interview. We've had a couple dropping in recently. So we had Mark Hughes, Mark Bowen, and also Ramon Vega. We've had Jock Brown in the last week, but it wasn't on the AXOM channel. It was on Amy Canavan's own show, the Soccer Supernova. Coming up, we've got people like Gary Caldwell on Amy's show, Mark Wilson. I know he divides opinion, but you know he's a good talker, so it'll be interesting to hear from Mark. And on Thursday night, here's one for you, Lawrence. I'll be interviewing Stuart Slater.
Oh, happy days. Bums and seats, mate. Kind of player that does that, isn't he? Good start to his career. Good first game against Rangers. Kind of poor ending, but the press slaughtered him. What was it? Kind of like 14 games to score his first goal, and he was a winger and he was getting slaughtered. And I think Rangers had signed a Big Dunk, who taken 18 games or something like that to score his first goal. No condemnation of Dunk in the press, but Slater was getting...
Slated, you were going to say there.
Yeah, for not scoring. But Jim McLean definitely showed David Murray how to get some money out, didn't he?
He did. I mean, there were heady days for some, but Celtic were trying to enter the transfer market and compete and go toe-to-toe. So there was a whole series of signings back then under Liam Brady. Liam Brady himself, let's be honest, massive name in European football, great career in English and Italian football. But I think the Celtic board were kind of out of ideas. So they were looking across the city and they thought, well, they've brought in Souness from Italian football. We're going to bring in Liam Brady. Brady will be our Souness. It didn't quite work out. We then started throwing money at it. So the first guy in was Cascarino, 1.1 million. This is just to cheer everybody up who's maybe feeling that this is the worst time ever for Celtic. We then bring in Gary Gillespie for £1 million, Tony Mowbray for £1 million from Borough. And later on, it wasn't in the first season, but later on we bring in Stuart Slater, Andy Payton and Rudy Vata on the same day. And Stuart Slater was £1.5 million. He was the record signing for Celtic at that time, and it was quite a coup because he had been an England B internationalist. He had played with Liam Brady at West Ham, and he looked brilliant against Rangers. I remember the game well, Lawrence. He also looked outstanding away to Borussia Dortmund. You know, this is the thing. We had some incredible results in the darkest of times. There was a few really bad results against Rangers, but often we could go toe-to-toe with them. And in Europe, now and again, we'd pull out an incredible result against the likes of Borussia Dortmund or Sporting Lisbon. And Cologne. Yep.
Turned out John Collins, what a game that was, eh?
3-0, we beat them at Celtic Park. Yep.
Outstanding, wasn't it?
And I realise this is a wee bit before your time, Natasha, so we won't bore you any longer. But Stuart Slater, he's going to come in, he's going to chat to us about coming up to Celtic, his career since then as well. He seems like a lovely chap. I've always wondered about guys like Slater because I don't think he's done much in the way of speaking about Celtic since he left. A lot of the players didn't really get asked back. You know, I spoke to Andy Payton last year. He's never been back to Celtic Park. A lot of these guys are kind of forgotten about. So we'll be chatting to Stuart Slater. It gives me time to do things like that and other Axon projects that will give you more free content. So I'm sure that's a good enough trade-off. But let's have a look at some more of the comments coming through. Wallace Pearce is feeling our 1980s throwback. Lawrence Partizan in 89. What a night of ups and downs. That was a game where Jakonowski scored 4, but we still went out. Hugh Jameson, Rudy Vata, the Albanian Pele, as no one ever said. Vata's a great guy though, Lawrence, because again, he plays for the Axom Greats, doesn't he? The Celtic Greats.
But after he left Celtic, he had a career in the Bundesliga after then, you know, Vata was, I think, he was a good player for Celtic, you know, but yeah, he went on to have a fairly successful spell in the Bundesliga, you know, as much as kind of he gets slated in Scotland a bit, you know, and he still got it with some of the kind of 60 yards passes, and not to you, mate, you don't get that far up the park, but
you're right, thanks for that, Lawrence. Moving on. Yeah, he takes it a bit serious, does Rudy, even these days. But Rudy Vata's son, last I heard, was still at Celtic. And he's a very, very promising youth player at Celtic Park. So he was born in Glasgow. I think Rudy's wife is Glaswegian. So yes, one to look out for in the future is Rudy's son. And when we asked him about his son, he basically said, he's okay. He's fine. Rather than wax lyrical about him. But that's just Rudy Vata for you. Now, looking ahead then, I mean, the league is long gone. When we look ahead to the fact that we've still got 2 games, Natasha, to play against Rangers, regardless of what anyone might say, and I know Lawrence is very vocal in relation to officialdom in Scottish football, absolutely. You know, the Scottish government, the Scottish media. Lawrence, I get all that. But Rangers, in terms of their form, have been impressive. And, you know, I know that they've been scraping a few results recently. Are you fearful at any point this season, Natasha, of going into the last 2 games against Rangers in the state that Celtic are in, with no tactics, being unable to defend a set piece? Is that a concern for you?
Of course it's concerning. I mean, it's concerning with every game we go into at the moment, regardless of if it's against the bottom side or the top side. I'm concerned about our defending. Am I concerned about the Rangers games? They are slightly different, aren't they? It's this old myth that nothing matters when it's a derby game. But to be honest, I think it does come into play slightly, and we saw that in the game in January. You know, we were consistently the better side for the large parts of that game, and then obviously a red card changes things. You know, we were coming off, you know, not the best run of form. They were getting all the praise in the media about how wonderful they were. You know, we were the better team on the day. So, you know, that can happen. So regardless of the form running up to the couple of games we've got left to play them, you know, anything can happen. But, you know, of course I'm concerned. I hope that it'll never get into the heights that we've achieved over the last few years, the 5-1s, the 5-0s. You know, you can't take that away from us. Those were excellent days, and I just hope we can deny them similar days.
This is a big thing, going back, and it is all relative, I know that, but going back to the days of Rudy Vat, I remember him scoring against a very, very strong Rangers side, and it was in the Hampden season, which was a dreadful season. The thing is, it's not about being a Celtic da, Lawrence, but, you know, people saying this is the worst season in memory. Maybe in some people's memories, but there were worse. There were a lot worse seasons. I remember finishing 5th under Billy McNeil in the 1990s. There were worse seasons, but I'm not going to get into a 1990s rant here.
See, when we finished 5th in the 90s, I remember my dad telling me, this is nothing compared to the 50s, son.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
and so it goes on, I know, and so it goes on. But the point I was making there is, even back then, we could pull out a result. We could pull a result out the hat against a very strong Rangers side who were on their way, as we now know, to winning 9 titles in a row. And we beat them 3-0 at home that day. My concern is, you know, I look at the scoreline when we were beating Rangers 5-0 after 50 odd minutes, and I look back to that scoreline because, you know, looking back there, you're thinking we should have beaten them 8-0, 9-0. It should have been a record derby result, without a doubt, and you know, without a shadow of a doubt. Are we that bad, Lawrence? Are we going to get done over by Celtic? Are we that you know, systemically bad at the back that they're going to see our weaknesses?
I don't think we're that bad. We're in danger of that. But I would say that there is no one in the team that you could say could command that box, whether it's a centre half or a keeper. So we know what our weakness is, and everyone that plays against us knows what our weakness is. Kind of middle to front, you know, we're decent. But we know what our weakness is. Cross balls into us with Rangers, you know, and that happens to be their strength. You know, get a free kick, get Tavernier to swing a ball into the box. It's, you know, their strength, unfortunately, kind of plays on our weakness. But I wouldn't think we're looking at 5 going on 10 or anything. I wouldn't feel that that's going to happen in any game against them. We may get Boris back soon as well, which, you know, I think his pace on the right has been sorely missed. And I think we'll get more out of Eddie with Forrest there, both of them fairly rapid players. So, yeah, I wouldn't think 5 or 6 nils on the cards.
Well, you know, I'm not suggesting that it's possible, Lawrence, but when it comes down to a dressing room who is unhappy, and that's something that Neil Lennon has stated a few times in the past, the fact that we don't know how to defend, again, an admission by Neil Lennon, we don't have a game plan, something that the vice-captain said. It does concern me that these games are coming up and we're not in the best of form, and we're not in the best frame of mind, or state of mind, as it were. Going into the rebuild, Natasha, whoever's in place, we look at the fact that Ncham will probably follow Frimpong out the door. In fact, I think that's guaranteed. We've also got the question of the other 3 players, Ayer, Edouard and Christie. Would Julien have been part of that? Maybe, if he didn't have the kind of long-term injury problems that he suffered. Now, when I'm looking at the 3 players there, the very fact that Julien is now out, we need to move heaven and earth to make sure that Ayer is still at this club. I've suggested at various times this season, some might agree or disagree, I would actually give him the captaincy of this football team for next season. And it will be key to any rebuild that Chris Ayer is part of that. I know the quality that Edouard has. But he needs to go. It's the end of the cycle at Celtic for him. It's the same route that Dembele has taken and others before him. When I look at Christie, he's always going to divide opinion. We do have the talent of Turnbull in the team that, for me, you look at that as an antidote if Christie's to leave. But Ajer, I don't think we can afford to lose him.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It's something I said before as well, is that, the talk has been about building a team around Turnbull or Sorrow or McGregor. To me, the absolute ideal candidate to build the team around would be Ajer. Do I think we can keep him? Probably not. But he's absolutely ideal for doing that. He's stable at the back. He can be good for, Welsh to learn from. I know they were both suspect for the goal at the weekend, but Ajer is that sort of player that you can build a team from. You need that core strong at the back, and Ajer can be that. And in terms of the person he is as well, I think you're right. I think he perhaps does show more leadership qualities than McGregor. I think he could be a good captain. But the problem for us is, and it is the problem when we bring in these excellent young players, is that they have ambition and they have ability to match that ambition. So he could go and join the AC Milan team. He could go into the biggest leagues in Europe. And that's what makes it hard to hold on to these players. And that's a unique problem that Celtic have compared to the rest of the league, is that we have players of the ambition and the ability that they do have one eye on the door and one eye on their future. And if we could pull something out the bag to make Ajer stay for another couple of seasons, then I would be absolutely delighted. But I think him personally is probably pretty keen on a move this summer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll talk about cycles, and I think that happens. It's a natural thing for players like Ajer. At some stage in his Celtic career, he's loaned out to Kilmarnock. Next thing you know, he's in the team, he's commanding, and people are talking about a move to AC Milan. The interest was confirmed, of course, by Paolo Maldini. Now, I made the reference in relation to, do you think Ajer is at that standard that he could make it at an AC Milan? Well, just look at Laxalt. We've got an AC Milan player playing for Celtic, and for me, Ajer is head and shoulders above Laxalt in terms of a footballer. Now, I'm going to ask you, Lawrence, because I'm going back a wee bit. It's obviously a great honour to captain Celtic. A massive honour. There's not been a massive amount, really, of captains over the years because, the armband goes to someone who seems to hold it for years and years. And Scott Brown's been a fantastic captain for Celtic. But I remember the club, part of the process of keeping, and I'm not comparing Ajer to Kenny Dalglish, the part of the process of keeping Dalglish a further season was to give him the captaincy. You'll remember it yourself. So he was given the captaincy and he stayed longer than he wanted to stay because he was ready to move, and that was part of a new deal. Are we at a different stage in terms of football where a new deal plus the captaincy would be seen as a bonus for a player to stay at Celtic?
Listen, we've got to try out captaincy. We used to try testimonials as well, to keep them longer alongside I've been here now 6 years.
You'd write it into the new contract, yeah. Yeah,
testimonial. Mind you, that used to be when £1 million was worth something to football players, but, it's kind of, you've got to try it. I definitely have Ajer as captain. He's, I think, outside of Brown in that team, he's probably it's one of the things we suffer for after losing like Lustig and Tierney, Foster and Gordon. Those players were all leaders. Mm-hmm. You look at the team just now and you're going, well, where's your leaders in the team?
That's interesting, Lawrence. And again, there's been a bit of 90s chat today, but when you tear the leaders out of the side all at one time, we did it with Roy Aitken and Tommy Burns and Billy Stark and Mark McGee and Frank McAvenny, and it was a huge, and Mick McCarthy, a huge amount of experience, but they were all leaders in their own right, and they all left the club within a very short period of time. And it takes years to then have 3 or 4 leaders on the park. And I think you're absolutely spot on with that. We did lose a lot of leadership in the players that you've mentioned. But for me, we'll see how that goes with Ajer, because there's going to be a lot of interest, as you say, Natasha, because of the talent of the boy. And it would not surprise me if he went to the very, very top in European football. It's been absolutely brilliant to be back in the hot seat. Thanks to Kevin Graham for giving me it back. That's really greatly appreciated. The comments have been brilliant. Thank you for that. I'm aware that the sniper has to be on better form to identify some of the lesser kind of comments that have been coming through, so I'll have a work through them. But all that's left for me to say is thank you once again for Lawrence Connolly and Natasha Meikle for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.